was a wonderful lunch, and I hope you got some fresh air and sunshine and got to breathe. And we'll begin in just a moment.
Do you want to put your mic back on?
Oh, I should probably put my mic back on. Be careful, be careful. It's such a nice place. Right.
And then you get the late 80s, 90s, early 90s to 90s, you know, the end of the 90s, we had a good group, and then they got a real small classes. So, all that, it's just, the lows are really good. Your wife is.
Thank you.
Right.
Let's put this.
Here, here.
So it's not just all on? Yep. So it's not recognizing it as the output? Let me turn it off and turn it back on.
I know we had it up this morning.
Yeah, I already put it in my car, so I wouldn't forget it.
It's not like a meeting.
We can just put the microphone inside it.
We give them what should go, who wants to do.
Yeah, it's not right.
So we're trying to figure out what first call.
Just use the microphone, we'll just use the handheld. Thanks for trying.
To understand. We realize we have to be clear about
Now it just recognizes.
Yeah, I'll put it straight into the computer.
gentle suggestions that you can make if we want to, but this is something we actually want you to do. And so, this is the kind of thing, like I know Danielle, their first call people read it together.
Asking is a skill that we can easily take for granted. While having
We'll just have to, at this point, we're not introducing techniques. But I think it's working out.
All right, my friends, I think we have our technology worked out for this afternoon. Let us all pray for our technology, shall we? Thanks. Everybody enjoy lunch this afternoon? Good, good. No napping. If I catch anybody snoring, you're on my list. So, you good, Chris?
We lost this video.
Y'all, we need to pray a little harder.
Is there a blessing for the technology?
There's a blessing for everything.
May the Lord bless you.
Are we going to Anatevka?
Yes, we're going to
We're
Anatevka.
going to Anatevka, I thought so, okay.
We go to Anatevka a lot in the Synod office.
Okay.
Sometimes we bless the Tsar, sometimes we bless many other things.
Bless their heart.
I know
That
what
is the
that
Jewish
means.
equivalent of that, isn't it?
That was part of orientation for students from the north when I came here. It was a very useful thing to learn.
So what Chris is trying to set up is a video that he waited for an hour yesterday while I was trying to find it. I think the spirits have been saying, we shouldn't show you this video. But I do want to show you this video at some point in time.
The question is which spirits?
And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
So while Chris is still working on the,
Chris? Try this.
while he's still working on that, we're just gonna move along. So here we go. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you. Well, welcome back from lunch, and I'm grateful to have another conversation with you this afternoon. We don't have a lot of time, but we're going to try to hit some best practices that I hope you're familiar with, and maybe some concepts that will be new to you. And the slide that was up before, if you saw that, was a question, who is watching us? And so I invite you, you've got the printout of the PowerPoint slides, so you can look at the paper copy of that, and invite you to pause for a moment and think about whether those three suggestions of bodies or groups that are watching us feels accurate or not, or what does that help you to realize? You realize that the world is watching us, and guess what? We as a church, we've kind of got integrity and credibility challenge right now, right? We know the world needs Jesus. We know the world needs the church. We know the church has a place. But let's think for a moment, who is watching us? Now on the slide, the three prompts that I've given you are, there are other nonprofits, there are community leaders and businesses, and there actually are donors out there who may be ready to give our ministries $100 or $500 or $200 or $2,000. What do you think they're saying about us? And what do we need to start thinking about in terms of our integrity so that we can restore and rebuild the reputation of the ministries that we love? And I'm not talking about any particular denomination, right? I'm talking about the cultural ethos that we have the privilege of living in, that some describe as post-Christendom. Okay? So take a moment and think about those. Are those people watching us? And what are they experiencing or thinking about us? I'm looking for somebody to give me an example. What do you think they're thinking about us? Yes.
There's a survey, something that we have access to that gives us information about what people are thinking about in terms of religion. And I had looked to see what the general consensus was in the Newberry area. And one of the biggest complaints that people had about church was that we're always asking for money. So that perception that all we are is gimme, gimme.
Mm-hmm. So the way we talk about money has been self-defeating, right? Has contributed to that perception. Anything else you can think of? If you can't think of what they're thinking about you, I'd like you to take that space beside that slide and begin to jot down who some of the others in your ministry context are that are potential partners, allies, and resources. So what are the other nonprofit organizations near you? What are the community leaders and businesses that are potential allies? Who are the donors that simply haven't been asked to support our ministry? Take a moment and see if you can generate, it's kind of like a community scan, and see if you can come up with some responses to that. Again, this is your work to take home with you, because the question will be, what is our relationship with these potential allies? So take a moment to work on that and see what you fill in. See if you can come up with some partner organizations, prospective partners, prospective community entities, and prospective or current donors. And use that space in your, either your handout or your slides handout to jot down some ideas. Probably have more possibilities out there than you realize. Gift of this space. Brainstorm. Who's out there? So I hope that continues for you. Again, that's an experiential exercise for you to live with, work with, explore.
Some churches will help with the financial.
Because what we're going to do this afternoon, if you look at your handout, the next slide is titled, What the World Believes About Stewards. And I want you to think about who knows about us, who might we get to know better, before we dive into what we think, how we're presenting who we are to the world. What does the world actually think of us as stewards? Because some people are kind of disappointed in our stewardship and our way of being, and other people are completely unaware of the work that we're doing for mission and ministry. So we're going to talk about 4 components of the book, and then you'll also see in the handout, the second page is about congregational financial stewardship, and on the back, actually on the front side of that, there's a list of 14 best practices. And we're going to get to that, but before we go there, I want to walk you through 4 concepts in the book and show you where the stuff is in the book so that you can learn from what others have told me is really helpful and thoughtful in this book as a resource thinking about stewardship. So those 4 topics are listed on your next slide in your handout. They are asking, which we're going to try to circle back to, front porch, back porch, multiple spigots, stewardship versus finance mindset, and permanent file. So these are all elements of the book that people have said, that's an interesting concept. Let's think about this some more. So I'm giving you what other people have said as the most intriguing and helpful to them as they use the book. All right, so you've got that on the slide, and so you know where we're going. I'm going to try to circle back to asking if I can show you this video. Maybe we won't be able to. If you look at, so skip over the 3 slides, asking, giving motivations, and the exercise. I want to talk through a minute about the multiple spigots concept. Now this is on page 78 in your book, and it's also worksheet 12, which is page 210. All right. So who's got an idea? What in the world am I suggesting with this concept of multiple spigots? Guess. You can guess.
Just multiple opportunities to invite people to give in the ways that match the resources they have to share.
Have you heard the research? Churches are no longer going to be able, ministries or organizations are no longer going to be able to depend on the offering plate to fund its ministries. You've heard that before, right? So it's an invitation to take that awareness and, okay, so what does that mean? What does that call us to? What's our next step? So multiple spigots, I use the image of a bathtub, right? We've got or a bucket. We've got one hose pouring into a bucket. You know how long it's going to take to fill it. You can project out how long it's going to take. But what happens if you open up multiple spigots? Right? It's exponentially faster, right? And so the chapter that talks about multiple spigots invites you to think about what are the current resources that are streaming into your ministry, which ones could be strengthened, clarified, modified, which ones need to be opened up. Does that make sense? So simple image, how do we, without talking about money all the time, create more pathways for financial resources to bless our mission and ministry? Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense? You with me? Okay. So what are the pathways that we use? Let's just brainstorm. What are some of the ways that your churches receive financial resources? What are some of the spigots that are currently open?
Online giving.
Online giving, yeah, that's a new one for lots of folks, right? Blessing COVID. Dang it. It was coming, but now it came a lot faster, right? Online giving, what else?
Special giving.
Special giving, give me an example.
The boiler's broken, we have, and we need to replace it, or our community nonprofit needs baby clothes and we're gonna help buy them.
Yeah, okay, inviting people to open up another spigot, another pocket. Yeah, what else?
Partner with business. What
Yeah.
we've done in our church, our men's group, makes donations to, in spirit, is for refugee program, and the way we raise the money sell Savannah banana tickets to our website, and for every ticket we sell, we get $6.
What's a Savannah, tell me, what's a Savannah banner?
Savannah bananas is our baseball team.
I got it, okay, okay. Yeah. Sporting institutions can be significant allies for mission and ministry. They want the community to be strong. They want people to be willing to come and experience what they have to offer. Yeah, neat partnership. Yes?
IRA distributions.
Yeah, explain that to the group. Do you all know what a charitable IRA distribution is? And why this benefits your ministry? I'm seeing some heads nodding. Could you just give us a quick overview so to make sure
No,
everybody...
I can't, sorry. All I know is, I'm sure glad that they're coming.
Oh, so you're seeing them coming in.
Seniors who have money that
Yep.
give away in different ways.
Yeah,
Opened up that spigot just by promoting.
Yeah.
I have been looking into that because in another year or two, I'll be getting into that. When you can do it after 70 and a half. You can take money from an IRA and go straight into the church, and you don't have to pay taxes on it.
Right.
And the church doesn't have to pay taxes on it.
Did you hear that? Did y'all hear that? Okay. So, have you done it, Randy, or are you thinking about
Not
it?
70 and a half yet.
Does anybody have people in their congregation that are over 70 and a half? Okay? And do some of them potentially have retirement IRAs, retirement funds? Yeah.
Then when you reach 72, you have some minimum that you have to
Yeah,
take
well,
out.
70 and a half.
You gotta have a requirement.
RMD, required minimum distribution. Once you get past 71 and a half, you're not allowed to just keep building. And this is, again, is the current tax structure, right? So beware, the tax structure may change at some point in time.
It actually is on the age, it's going up.
It's going up.
I think it's either 72 or, it's now 72, I think it's going to 73, and then later on it's gonna go up to 74.
Yeah, see? So I love the world of financial stewardship because a dollar is a dollar is a dollar, sort of. But the ways that we can steward financial resources is constantly changing and adjusting. Tax laws change, local community regulations change, investing institutions change what they provide. So it requires being curious and open to, all right, what's the new change? What's changed in this setting? So for a while, people would wait every year to see if the federal government would continue that charitable giving opportunity. Now it's law, but they can change what the threshold is of when you become eligible for it.
Well, that's required minimum distribution.
Uh-huh.
70 and a half, they never changed, 70 and a half.
Okay,
It's never changed. So once you're 70 and a half, you can start doing it. You don't need to have to take any out there. So.
got it, okay. So again, it's allowing people to access a resource that they have. For some people, the required minimum distribution increases their income enough so it bumps them up a tax bracket. Okay, so for some people will argue too that it's really 6 of one and a half dozen of another. But what a joy it is to help a senior pay their pledge or their financial commitment to the church with a blessing from the retirement fund, keep their other income in their pocket, and have more flexibility in their operating budget, and their household budget. So, yep, that's a great strategy. We don't talk about it very much, because we don't think there's very many people that have that capacity, but is that not a population that's growing? Right, it's probably a population that's growing. What are some other ways that resources can flow into your ministry? There's some suggestions in the book on starting on page 78, I think. This is where we are. You see a list there? Anybody do any fundraisers? Yeah? Okay. So when your finance committee sits around and says, we've got to figure out how to fund the resources of the mission and ministry we want for the next year, how many different strategies are they deploying? So it begins on page 78, and then it says income strategies. Asking, pages and pages, pledge drive, building use agreements, we mentioned that. collecting, silly little things like collecting bottles and recyclables, that can have an impact on your financial well-being because more people can participate in it. We got electronic giving, grants, right? Is there anything in this section on ways to increase the spigots that are open in your mission and ministry that you have any questions about? And again, I know some of you are speed reading through this section. I encourage you just to skim the headers, see if there's anything you have any questions about, or an example. Anybody got an example of a creative Fifth Sunday offering or a special offering?
I've thought about it in our church. I've seen it in other churches. We don't have enough youth, I think. The kids do it now. But some churches have what they call a noisy contribution. You've heard of that?
Yeah. Others of you done that?
Well,
So what makes it noisy?
it's coins drop into a little tin can, and you got the kids running around doing it. I was at one church, and she had to get, and everyone had to get some money from me.
Yeah, nice.
I was gonna say something similar, but I can't remember which church I was preaching at, but it was their noisy offering Sunday, but they had a pickle jar, because the offering is for people in a pickle,
Oh, creative.
and I thought that was really cute.
Cute. Pickle jar, yeah.
Is that Redeemer in Charleston?
Problem-solving
No, it
people.
wasn't Redeemer in Charleston. I preached there.
I'm not sure how it fits in the
Yeah.
chart, but particularly as Lutherans, we have access through drive-in.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
amazing for us. If we can have somebody in our congregation coordinate that, and we get like, it's close to over $10,000–11,000 because every drive-in member has access to like $250 community grants to do projects.
Yeah.
And if you can coordinate that and parlay that in your congregation, that's thousands and thousands of free ministry money that is really available to us.
Yeah, Thriven's been very proactive about reinvesting in mission and ministry with their partners. Right? So here's the next question. What are the new possibilities that are beginning to occur for you, and who do you need to work with to explore them? And beginning to think about your next steps from any of the ideas that have already been surfaced or from ideas that you're picking up in the text. There's always a next step to take. What are the next steps for you? We've actually already addressed the third question a little earlier before lunch when we talked about resistance. How do you respond to resistance?
One of the things you haven't brought up is, not only have money coming in, you got going out. You gotta make certain that the monies we're spending, we're getting it wisely, and we're getting as frugal as we can with the congregation's money.
So, go a little bit deeper. Why is that important? Why does that matter?
Because that's important, because it's just making certain that if people don't think that you're spending the money wisely, they're not gonna give it to you.
But I want you to repeat what you just said into the microphone.
What I said is, if you don't think, if the congregation does not think that you're spending the money wisely, they are resistant. If you don't think that you're spending the money wisely, they are resistant to giving you more.
Exactly. Anybody experiencing that? Trust violations from 2 weeks ago or 25 years ago generate resistance, right? So sometimes we have to go back and heal some of those harms, rebuild trust, right? So that's just as much work as what's the next event or strategy we're going to deploy. Is this faith community prepared to be generous and to trust its financial leaders? Okay? That's the point I want you to hear out of our conversation today, because you can learn dozens and dozens of techniques, and if there's a history of mistrust, mismanagement, misconduct, then you're going to be swimming up with a lot more resistance, right? So the finance folks need to be aware of that. You need to be aware that, yep, you can develop some more strategies, but there may be some residual resistance that is actually undermining all the great work and the new strategies that you're deploying. So, that makes sense? Man, I thought we were just going to learn some techniques and tools. There really is a behavioral and emotional well-being component to this work. You with me? Anybody have any questions about that dynamic? All of this stuff about financial strategies and audits and balance sheets and knowing the difference between a financial report and a balance sheet, that's great. And it doesn't move you forward unless you address resistance. Yes?
I've been in congregations where they have, some folks have insisted on having the financial figures in the bulletin every Sunday.
Yeah. Say that again.
Okay,
Say that again.
so, okay, turn it off. There you go. So some of the congregations I've been in have been adamant that we must print every financial detail in the bulletin every Sunday. And others have given much more abbreviated reports. Council reports vary from almost every receipt for every roll of tape to big picture stuff. Are there best practices on this, or are we all just swimming in the dark?
So anybody in the room got some responses about how do you know? Here we go.
All the above.
Okay. I'm just gonna go ahead and say more about that.
Yeah, say more to that. So what I have found, it all comes down to trust. And so when we're communicating financial information in particular, clarity and understanding that people understand money in different ways, because a lot of misinterpretation comes because some people don't give enough detail and other people don't understand what the detail is. So it's about drawing pictures, is really what it comes down to when you're communicating financial information. And understanding that, yeah, a little bit of it is going to be based on the personality of the community itself. You know, so I've been in congregations like you. Some of them, I got to see all the dollars and cents, and I want to see where we are compared to last year or last month and where we're going. And I've got other people that are like, nope, we don't need to know it. We're going to trust you on this and draw some pictures at the end of the year. That's been my experience.
Thanks. Any other experiences with what has to be reported publicly? And this is perfect setup for the next slide that we're going to.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Couldn't have done it better myself. So this is an example. I'm going to address your question about what gets printed in the bulletin or the newsletter, because this is an example of a best practice that has shifted over time. 20 years ago, when nobody was telling anybody anything, right? The financial stuff was the finance committee's realm, and everybody needed to stay out of it in some churches. Some of us consultants encourage churches to share something, just put something. And then we had this pattern of, oh, well, it's this is how much we needed to bring in this week, and this is how much we brought in, and this is how far behind we are, right? Really great way to encourage generosity is to tell people for 9 months how far behind we are. So when does, speaking of spigots, when does the most of the financial resources to your ministry arrive? First, second, third, or fourth quarter of the year? Fourth quarter of the year, right? So, and there is a piece about this in the text. If you're going to track things on a monthly basis, you need to adjust it for the fact that that fourth quarter, your income estimate is going to be higher than the previous 3 quarters. So you have to prorate the numbers some. If you do it, just divide your budget by 12, you'll probably spend 9 or 10 months discouraging generosity. Oops. So now we temper it and say, if you're not communicating anything, start communicating something. But what goes into your bulletin, this is our next slide, is something positive. You have to find something positive to communicate with your people. There we go. I did it right this time. So I want to introduce you to this concept of the front porch and the back porch. And I apologize if this doesn't quite fit your personal culture, so think of this in generalities. Most homes or organizations have a front porch or front door. What happens at the front door?
Clean, presentable.
Clean and presentable. It's where we engage with the world, right? It's where we are seen, right? What does the world see of us? Where we're seen by the world. And many houses, apartments, organizations have a back door or a back porch. And what happens at the back door?
It's where the work gets done.
Is where the work gets done, right? It's where the broken chair lands before it gets repaired. It's where the trash gets moved out of the living space on its way to the garage or to recycling, right? The back door is in essence more private. Does that make sense? Okay, so just live with this metaphor at that level. Okay, front porch and back porch. Think back to the last conversation that your congregation had about finances. And was it a conversation that needed to be on the front porch or the back porch? So the job of the finance team is to cultivate and develop the resources that the mission and your ministry has decided it wants to fund, execute, or create in this particular budget period. Sometimes it doesn't line up right? Sometimes there's a gap between the plans, the vision, when we start with vision, and the reality, the bottom line. So where does the conversation about that realignment, where should that happen? And where does it happen? Where should it happen and where does it happen? So best practice, there's a challenge to the financial health and well-being of an organization. It's the work of the finance committee or team or board. They problem solve, strategize, do the work, and then come back to the front porch with a plan. Right? And maybe we need your help for this plan, but at least we're coming back with a plan. Are you with me? I think we get into a lot of trouble and we inadvertently discourage generosity because way too often, the hard conversations about financial management, stewardship, choices happens in the parking lot, right? Happens in the kitchen. Doesn't happen in the finance committee. So if you're a financial leader or a participant in the financial leadership of your church in this ministry, I think you can contribute to well-being, reducing conflict, and healthy boundaries by simply asking that question. Is this a back porch conversation or front porch conversation? Not just focusing on the back porch being the place where the garbage is, but the back porch is the place where the work gets done, the hard things get said, the choices get discerned. That make sense? Anybody is this ringing with anybody? Can you think of a time when a finance conversation that really belonged in the back porch where it could be studied, explored, deep conversation could happen, and it inadvertently happened on the front porch? Think of some examples of that?
Just think of a congregational meeting.
just think of a congregational meeting, right? When someone from the education committee starts asking about the electricity bill, it's a finance committee conversation. So in church, we're so invested in beloved community and treating it open and honest communication. Sometimes we have the wrong conversations in the wrong place. And so I invite you just to add that to your discerning leadership eye. There's so many conflicts that happen because of the conversations in the parking lot that really needed to be in the staff parish relations committee, et cetera. So you following me? It's dangerous. And that's why putting out on our weekly bulletin, that we're $3,000 behind. Come join us. We're $10,000 behind this year. Come join us. It's really not leading with our best message. Our best message is we're people of God, we're up against some challenges, God's in it with us, we're going to figure this out. If you have any ideas, here's the finance committee chair's name and contact information. But we're not going to talk about it over coffee. And I'm not talking about shutting down conversation, are you with me? I'm not talking about shutting down communication, I'm talking about directing communication in healthier pathways.
But the congregation needs to know what's happening. Even though you say it might be, fourth quarter might be the most,
Yeah.
and you've been doing this for some time, you never know exactly what's going on with that.
Yeah. I'm not talking about squashing communication, I'm talking about directing communication to the places where people actually have the authority and the responsibility to bring decisions back to the body. Now, some of you have got the single board model and things like that. That can help, it can make it harder too. Does anybody have an example of a place or a time when a decision or a financial matter actually got discussed in a place that might not have been the right place?
I have a comment. A lot of times in addressing, avoiding some of those conversations that can take place at congregational meetings,
Yeah.
you simply plan a forum where that one or two persons asking questions can be face to face with those on finance. You can talk those things out and maybe resolve
Yeah.
the issue they were gonna bring up at the congregational meeting and save yourself about 30, 40 minutes of negative, divisive, possibly a divided vote. Who wants that
Right.
on your ministry spending plan every year?
Yeah.
So planning those forums ahead of time, now, sometimes there's not many people who show up, but those who do have concerns, you give them that opportunity, and maybe you can avoid the back porch conversation from happening on the front porch.
Yeah, beautiful. It can be caucuses, it can be forums, it could be, and that's what they do in the court system. You have a caucus. Let's check this out before we go in public in front of other people. So I don't want to sound too legalistic or anything, but what happens when you begin to think about where conversations are happening and whether or not they're happening in the healthiest place or not? And again, don't shut people out, create additional spaces as needed to get people information. The problem with the information on the bulletin is one-way communication. It's not a dialogue, and it's, hey, look, we're in trouble. Hallelujah, amen. We're not sure how we're going to fund this ministry. All right? So realistically, I think we're spending an awful lot of time messaging that we're in crisis. And then we wonder why people are like, get back to us when you get your act figured out. Right? I don't think any of it's intentional or malicious. I think it's just a default, and these were best practices, but best practices change over time. Right?
But you're not, I'm telling you, you're not gonna get by without putting that stuff in the bulletin.
In some cultures, it becomes a norm, it becomes expected.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you're gonna make a change, then you call it an experiment, try something different, see what happens, yeah. So I think if you've got a culture that has to communicate something, then my challenge invitation to you is see if there's a way to supplement that information with something positive. It could be, we had more income in March of this year than we had in March of the last 2 years. Okay? Which again is like this front porch, people are watching, they're looking at us, and if we got to do some reality check information, can we also find a faithful, hopeful message in the midst of it? It's both and. Yeah. Thank you for your honesty.
You kind of answered it. It's being able to compare apples to apples. It's not, like you said, linear, but maybe putting in last March, year over year, where we are.
Yeah, yeah. The best practice is to look at 3 to 5 years of history, okay? And if January is usually 7% of your income, then you plan your budget for 7% of your income in January. If July is 18% of your income, so you base it on actual history rather than 1/12, 1/12, 1/12. Okay, that makes sense? So this is stuff, these are not quick and easy answers. These are new ways of inviting you to think about how communication is happening and what's being communicated. Front porch? Back porch? Yes?
There may also be creative ways that we can separate worship bulletin from being our institutional communication vehicle. And that's somehow helpful because the worship bulletin is front porch, and that's all about worshiping God.
Yeah.
And people who might be visiting, coming in, searching, yearning for hope in their lives, and this is about worshiping God, there doesn't need to be a bunch of institutional information back porch in that. If you've got to do it on Sunday morning because there's no other avenue to do it, put it in a different different sheet of paper, hand that to the members as they come in, it's a different sheet, but that's back porch rather than the front porch. And we're sending conflicting messages to people who are on this spiritual journey, and we're dumping a bunch of our institutional garbage on them. And how do we divide that from?
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to filter it, right? Look, come to our church, we're worshiping God, you're gonna love these hymns, you're gonna love these prayers and psalms, and oh, by the way, we're looking for another $30,000 to get through the year. And that's why people say churches are always talking about money, right? And it's not on purpose, it's just sort of where we've evolved into. So thank you for those distinctions. Any other thoughts or comments or wisdom about, what does it mean to think about where our financial conversations are happening? And the last one, what do you think about that last question? Have you ever, as a pastor, ever been asked to stand up and ask everybody to give another $500 a month? Some finance committees do set their pastors up and ask them to, pastor, if you would just encourage everybody to give another $10 a week, then the bottom line would work. And that's, again, that's back porch work being put on the front porch and being put on the person who's the spiritual leader of the organization. This is a place where laity really have a significant responsibility to walk alongside and to share and communicate well. The research does show that an ask from a lay person can be more effective than an ask from a pastor. And pastors, I'm not letting you off the hook. You still have to do the offering every Sunday. It's some creative invitation, inspirational way of being. But that is there intentionally so that you can ask the question, am I the right person to bring up this need conversation, this project? Pastors usually are not. Okay? Questions about that? I think if we reflect back on what we've defaulted to, too often we have decided it was okay to just ask the paid professional to do the ask, and that ends up being begging from the pulpit, and it's usually not as effective as we hope it would be. Any questions about that? So this is an interesting chart that's in the book. I think it's on page 112. And one of the things I love about the ELCA is you use the DISC model. Do you know what the DISC is? You know, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder, Enneagram. DISC is another one of those personality typing strategies. And I'd like someone to stand up and read the left list out loud, and then just think about the skill set that represents. Where's the microphone? Somebody who's ready to stretch should speak these words into the air for us. Let's just give the microphone to someone. A chance to use your voice. This is beginning to understand, this is really a diversity appreciation exercise. We are not all created exactly the same way, right? So think about these characteristics in the description, and after you hear it, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions about what these words might mean. Would you read the financial mindset column?
Okay. Finance mindset, accountability, conservative, numbers, cautious, budget/planning, systems, audit/accountability, and policies.
Okay, so who in this room is getting warm fuzzies? Yeah, that sounds like me. Yeah. Believe it or not, there are people for whom those words really resonate. That's where they dwell, all right? Can you either raise your hand if this feels like where you're most comfortable? And that's, yep, great. Thanks, Randy, for being honest. And if it's not you, think about who are the people in your ministry context that you can identify with that skill set. You've got some people in your ministry who bring those topics up, right? And I want to be clear, by conservative, I don't mean politically, I just mean conservation, preservation is important, okay? And sometimes all of us are that way. Does anybody have any questions about any of those concepts on that list? Makes sense to you? All right, so we don't have a lot of people. Yes, John?
Not a question, just an observation, that a lot of longtime church members and a lot of people who get elected to councils fit in that category, because that's they are motivated by commitment and by challenge, and so they bring that gift to the meeting, which doesn't always align with everybody who's maybe sitting in the congregation. So sometimes that voice gets overrepresented in a leadership setting.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Go for it.
Okay. So there's this way of being, and then there's this way of being. And for some of you, this use of the term stewardship might make more sense if I use the word development mindset. Okay? But somebody read the stewardship mindset lists so we can hear that.
You gotta make me pick it up.
Generosity, optimistic, people, risk tolerant, vision possibilities, ideas, fundraising, and relationships.
Many of you identify with that list. Yeah, I see some hands going up. Okay. Yeah. Any questions about that list? Or if you're not that way, can you think of people that show up that way? Okay. So again, this is diversity appreciation. There used to be this mantra that every church should have a finance committee and a stewardship committee. And it kind of went away for a while. And then when I looked at this is really looking at people's talents and gifts through the disciplines. People who have the financial mindset and people who have the stewardship mindset are going to butt heads unless they recognize that those are different ways of being, different skill sets, and both are needed. You know, wave theory? So now we put stewardship and financial mindset people together in a room, and they depress the generosity of the congregation. When we recognize those are different mindsets, different ways of being, and they can build on each other, then we can build generosity. But what happens too often, as John said, is that without that knowledge and recognition that these are really distinct ways of being, and they both have value and merit, we inadvertently set people up to undermine the very work that both groups are trying to accomplish, right? Inadvertently. So you take someone who's optimistic and very risk tolerant and put them in the same room with someone who's cautious and appropriately looking at accountability and conservatism, they're going to have a hard time seeing eye to eye, right? So what do we need the financial mindset for? Survival, right? Integrity, credibility, responsibility, the bottom line. What do we need the stewardship or development mindset for?
Oh, possibilities, future, where
Possibility.
are we going, what's it look like?
Yeah, what visioning, what's possible, who haven't we talked to? What is God calling us to do? The bank book doesn't call us to do anything, God calls us to do stuff, right? And so this is just an invitation for you to begin to evaluate the stewardship and finance congregation culture in your ministry setting, and how much time is spent focusing on the financial mindset and how much is spent focusing on the stewardship or development mindset. I think we have defaulted to a whole lot of maintenance mindset, and our hearts are breaking, and people are calling us to get up and do something as a church, which is going to require risk, right? And so I feel like we're in this culture clash between the leaders that we put into financial roles in our ministry. This is why I am now reconverted to the importance of having distinction between financial work and conversations and development or stewardship growth conversations. So most situations would say that your treasurer, God bless treasurers,
Yeah.
who manage the details, track things, can look at a spreadsheet without their eyes going blurry, they're probably not the voice that's going to lead your stewardship campaign. They may be part of the voices, right? But you need a champion, you need an advocate, you need somebody who can stand up there and rally the troops. Is this making sense? Right? And there's nothing wrong with the way we've been, but what becomes possible when we add this to our stewardship of leaders and their capacity to help things to happen? Now back to John's question. Why do we spend so much time here? Because the people that are currently in leadership in many of our churches are the reliable, trustworthy, dependable, sanctuary-oriented way of being. Right? They're reliable, they're dependable, they're still here. They are still here. These folks, they've gone out and they've started conservation corps, and they've developed new community missions and ministries because they've gotten frustrated with the church's insistence on focusing on financial management. Church is supposed to be both sanctuary and transformative. It's got to do both. And so how do we take a real careful look at where we're putting our energy? We have to have both of these. I don't want anybody to leave here thinking I was judging or grading. They're both incredibly important. But how do we grow and become visionary leaders when we're constrained by our systems? Okay? Now, we were going to talk about policies and stuff like that. We need all of that. Is this a helpful construct for you to play with? And again, it's not going to all make sense today, but as you live with this, you're just going to see things. You're going to see people in different ways. You're going to see the way they show up differently. Okay? Yeah, they can work together, but they better appreciate each other's differences. Does that make sense? Yes?
Yeah, I wonder if I could maybe the mic-
Yeah, where's the microphone?
She's going.
We have been blessed by a property guy who recently retired at age 60. He was a captain in the Army, excellent negotiator. He probably saved the church somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 on negotiating a new copier contract, this, that. We're paying too much for the dumpster. We can have a team that goes take the trash to this and that. And what's happened is, because he has gained all this credibility with his negotiating techniques, he's also becoming one of the loudest voices. Let's not give any more money to the Senate, even though we had this surplus of 12,000. And then he would kind of list some of the things he's done, and he said, we've worked so hard to save this money and to just give it. And so, but he's a loud voice because he has all this credibility. We're grateful that he saved us all this money, but he's not a person on the right side, but yet he's got a loud voice.
Yeah. That's the real world that we live in. It's complicated working with people. And people who start out, looking like champions and pioneers can end up becoming limiting factors sometimes in the system. And that just means, again, you got to look at the budget once a month, once a year, stay on track of where the numbers are, and you got to look at these ever-changing dynamics about who your leaders are, what they're bringing to the table. What's his money story? What's his first job and his experience when he gave stuff away? Right? I'm going to tell you a horrifying story. In North and down East Maine, there's a bunch of churches who refuse to put their money even in a bank. And I finally found someone who said that is connected to their history because the first banking institution that arrived in this region was the KKK. The KKK took their money, and their money was gone. And so, decades later, they still don't trust the bank. So there's a story behind that behavior, and you might find some new strategies for modifying that behavior if you can get underneath and discover what some of that motivation is. Someone's successful, I trusted someone, lost money, or something like that, okay? I think you're getting it, right? You don't have all the answers now, but I'm inviting you to explore, right? The next slide, that's my favorite slide, is this concept of a permanent file. And this is another section in the book, and this really gets at best practices. Do any of you have churches where you could open up a drawer and you could find the charter the tax exempt information, the building use agreement stuff, the insurance policy information. Anybody have all that stored in one place? You're not alone. I have not yet found any church that's got these pieces somehow stored together. So how do we pass on our information? Anybody got a horror story about trying to change a bank account these days? The horror story, right? So and this is all stuff that's required for an audit. So the permanent file can be a double dipping exercise. So there's a whole list in the book of items to consider putting in your permanent file. I invite you to think about that. Should it be on-site, off-site? I don't know. Should there be multiple copies? I don't know. But if you don't have anything now, start with something and begin to build a repository where what we call the permanent file, where stuff can be found by those who come after us. That make sense? And the most important thing, you'd think that your charter and your legal documents are the most important thing, but I'm going to suggest that the most important thing there is to have records on your insurance policies. Okay? In many states in the United States of America right now, the legal system is lifting the statutes of limitations on certain crimes. And so there are some churches in very scary litigious situations because they can't prove that they had insurance in the 60s or 70s, and victims are coming forward. And the insurance companies don't record you as a prior customer. They clear out their records from year to year. So begin, if you don't have it, just begin or just create some sort of record of what type of insurance you had or what company you thought you had coverage with over the last couple of decades, okay? Because the whole purpose of policies and the contents in your permanent file is to reduce risk. And we're all going to face risk at some point in time, okay? So I'm not going to go over that laundry list of things that are recommended to be in that. If your church owns a bus, where's the title of it? And it's all that stuff that will be useful for somebody to be able to find. Copies of bequests that came in, the letter from the attorney or the will. Put it somewhere permanent. Does that make sense? So that's a best practice that virtually probably none of us are practicing. And if you begin to practice that in any way, shape, or form, then you're moving towards best practices. There's on your handout, there's a list of 14 topics. And so I'm just going to pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions about those elements. We're heading into a break, and then we're going to come back for a final brief time together. And I realize that may have been like drinking from a fire hose, but I wanted to just expose you to these different concepts. And then you get to choose and pick which ones are your best steps and next stepping points. Any questions about that list? Again, those are my simple phrases. They correspond to some elements in the book. So there are resources around each of them. Any questions about that list and what in the world is she talking about? All right, we are at the top of the hour. You've been sitting here for an hour. So I invite you to get up and stretch. When we come back, I'm going to give you some information about some other next steps, possibilities for you to consider. And then we're going to look at what's landing for you as, okay, spend a day listening to this stuff, getting this information. What's going to resonate with you, empower you, and give you guidance and courage to take the next step as a financial stewardship leader. Because you're here. You are automatically a financial stewardship leader. So we're on break till 1:15, and we'll start right up, and then we'll finish promptly. Thank you for your participation and contributions today.
So I'm conservative.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
And I am a dreamer.
you don't go nowhere.
And I am a dreamer, and I know that.
Yep. And, better for
Yes, I like the way you put together the budget. Because it felt like it was, well, what am I playing? And that was too much.
I don't think so, I don't know.
Okay. You guys are the troopers.
That's one thing I want you to just.
It's a lot these days to ask people to give a whole day to anything. So I'm so grateful for your willingness to hang in there through today and see what final gems we have to offer to you. In this last half-hour session together, my goal was that you would have an opportunity to ask me any other questions that have emerged through, and they can be case studies. Like we've had a couple of people, what do I do in this situation? And the group may have some wisdom to offer to you. And then also to tell you about some other next step possibilities that the ELCA is supporting. And then to have you use the bottom of your personal page. It's got some actions on it, I hope. And then to look to the second page at the bottom, it says my congregational actions. It's very intentional there. It just doesn't say what, but it says who and by when. And that's one of my learnings from the Creating a Culture Renewal community. It makes a big difference when we can identify those elements of the what next steps. So we'll be using Mentimeter, and I'll invite you to share both your personal and your ministry next steps with a word or two. I'm not looking for paragraphs here, but in this space, in this moment, what have we done? We've looked at dimensions of personal financial stewardship, some dimensions of congregational financial stewardship. And your ministry, your life and your ministry setting is way more complex and beautiful than anything we could cover in one day's conversation. So I want to open the floor for, what about this? Or questions that you have so that you can leave here. I don't know what your goal was at the beginning. Look back at what you wrote in the goals section at the beginning of the handout. And did you have a question or a hope there, and have we addressed it? So make this final session be what you need to receive from this space and time. Any questions? Where's the microphone? There's one over here.
Over, all the way. Okay.
This just helps the online folks feel a little more included. Or do you have questions, or, yeah, let me pass this back. I can. Thank you, Ozzy. It's going up. It's going up. Could be a button on the bottom too.
Yeah, it's just real simple question. Going back to the 14 practices there, number 9.
Okay?
Wasn't real clear about what, I think I know what that means. I don't know that you said anything about it. Enforce separation of duties and requirements of nonprofits. Could you say a word about that?
Absolutely, that's one of my favorite questions. So, do any of your churches have a 501c3 number? No?
Independent of the ELCA?
Do you consider, no, it could be under your ELCA umbrella.
Then yes.
Do you self-identify, okay, let me ask a different question. Do you self-identify as a nonprofit in the United States of America? Is there anybody here whose ministry does not self-identify as a nonprofit in the United States of America? So Dave Ramsey wouldn't, because he's a for-profit organization.
I appreciate you caught the word out of it. I've only used like 3 times. El Masri. El Masri organization.
El Masri organization, okay?
So I thought we were under the ELCA or the.
Probably under the ELCA umbrella.
Yeah, I know.
Yep, okay. So when you're a nonprofit in the United States of America, what does that require of us? You know, there's this separation of church and state. Does that mean we get that right, but don't have any responsibilities? No. What does that require of us? Not sure? Being a nonprofit in the United States of America requires us to follow the standards and the expectations of nonprofits in the United States of America. And that includes doing an audit, having different people handling income and expenses. These are internal controls. And something else, I'm drawing a blank, I'm tired. An audit, income and expenses by different people.
Probably non-political.
What's the third one?
Probably non-political.
Yeah, that's a piece of it, refraining from political endorsements of any political candidates. There's a financial one I'm drawing a blank on right now. Okay, so we are required to, and an audit is a declaration of our financial assets. That's a public declaration of it, right? We're not private nonprofits, we're public nonprofits. So do any of you fill out what's the form? It's the form that some churches are starting to, it's not the 1099.
Statement of giving.
No. 990? Yes, the 990. Any of you fill out 990s? Right. So churches are exempt from the 990 IRS regulation. All of this information is at www.irs.gov. Okay, so you don't have to remember a thing I say. All this information is at www.irs.gov for nonprofits. The expectation is that we follow the criteria that's there for nonprofit organizations. So separation of duties, that's one of the requirements from the IRS. So if somebody in your church says, why do we have to do this? Why do we have a different financial secretary tracking income and a different person treasurer's writing checks? It's an IRS requirement. It's a privilege of being a nonprofit in the United States of America. Why do we do an audit? It's a requirement. Okay? We do them in kind of different ways. And every nonprofit is required to fill out a 990, except churches are exempt. Love that tax code stuff. So we are not required to disclose our donors publicly. A university, a library, other nonprofits, probably the YMCA, they have to do a 990, and in that they have to report the names of all of their donors, which is why churches don't want to do it, right? That would be a very different reality, wouldn't it? If church donors' names were disclosed in a public tax document. So one of the things I love teaching is this distinction between the separation of church and state and our responsibilities as nonprofits in the United States of America. We don't talk about that very often, but if we care about future churches having this nonprofit status, then once we know the rules, it's a good idea to pay attention to them to the best of our ability. Okay, so that's your answer. You know, it's part of. There's more on irs.gov. Does that answer your question? Do you have another?
That's what I thought it was. I just wanted,
clarities.
Yep, separation of duties. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, then what I'd like to do is I would like to give you um, 3 minutes. Some of you have already done this, some of you haven't yet started. 3 minutes to think about the personal action steps at the bottom of the first page of the handout and ministry action steps on the second page of your handout. Put something there. You're creating breadcrumbs for yourself for the work down the road, and you will forget so much of what we've talked about today. So give yourself the gift of some notes. I'm going to start my timer now and spend 3 minutes identifying some actions and make them doable. Right? Don't make them so aspirational that it's not realistic. Your actions, your whens, your whos, your whats. hope you've generated some next steps for yourself or to share with others in your ministry setting, because what you take from today is the real fruit of all of our labors together. I want to take a moment and tell you about a couple of opportunities that the ELCA is supporting. No, that's not the right thing. All right, hold on a second. Do it this way. There we go. I'm just going to use my hand. I'm not going to use a flicker. The ELCA has launched something called Financial Empowerment for Missional Leaders webinar series. Has any of you heard of that before? Some of the DEMs have. Yep, you've heard of it, Ozzy, great. So it is a 9-month small group cohort experience using the book as the primary text, but going into much more detail. I've given you some of the highlights you got today have come out of those learning groups. We're currently seating people for the groups that will start in the middle of February. The cohorts will be 6 to 8 people, and I'll be leading one, and I've trained some other ELCA folks to be facilitators. If you're interested in the cohorts that start in February, contact your DM, please, as soon as possible. They will nominate. A pastor can participate and brings a layperson with them if they want to. It's $200 for the pastor, and then there's a synod fee, but that's the synod's responsibility. So one can make sure you knew about that. It's just an opportunity to be part of a supportive community. It's open to people from all over the country. So we've got people in Texas and groups of people from Maryland and folks from the Carolinas all together. That's been going for about 2 years, and it's been a lot of fun to engage with people. Then there's, I mentioned a little bit, the Creating a Culture of Renewal it's a 3-year commitment, but it is a very empowering experience. My testimonials, I got published in 25 months. And if you're interested in that, you've got my email address. On the 15th of February, there'll be a free intro to that experience. So if you're interested in that, contact me and I'll get you the information to attend that webinar. And then finally, we really didn't get to talk about asking at all today. The ELCA is now hosting cohorts of Cultivating the Craft of Asking. This is a 5-session experience. It includes some of the things we use today, the wheel, personal and congregational financial stewardship. But it's a 5-session, very focused on our personal relationship with money and the courage to invite other people to join us and support our ministries. Jessica Miller is a mission developer. I think she's in the Wisconsin Synod. She took Cultivating the Craft of Asking, and then she took the Financial Empowerment series. So January, February, she took that. The success story. And then December, she just reported that out of Cultivating the Craft of Asking, by June, she'd raised about $10,000. In December, she raised $53,000, and of that $53,000, $530 of it is monthly recurring giving. So she cracked that nut, and it's just really been fun. We don't do the work. We as facilitators help. You all do the work, and I believe that there are people out there just waiting to be asked. We have to keep our integrity and credibility and rebuild trust in many, many cases. But there are many people waiting to hear about the amazing missional work and ministries. Remember we started with vision? If your vision is to strengthen and expand mission and ministry in the community in which you're located, Cultivating the Craft of Asking may be an opportunity that you would like to consider. I currently have some cohorts starting. They started February 9th. So if you're interested in that, contact me, or you can go right to the website. And it's open registration. You don't have to go through anybody. It's open seating. Okay? Any questions about those opportunities? And all of those will be on, hopefully will be ongoing. So if this spring is crazy busy for you and you want to try back in the summer or the fall, that works too. And I want to thank the ELCA for their support of both of these opportunities. Now, the last thing we're going to do is I've titled this A Blessing of Your Plans, because I hope that in the midst of listening and receiving information today, your brain has been percolating and processing. I hope you've got some words on the piece of paper. So I'm going to switch over to the Mentimeter and invite you to use this code, use your phone, and tell us something about either your personal or your ministry goals, anything about them, and we will build a word cloud, and then we will have a blessing prayer. I do have a video that's 4 women who completed Cultivating the Craft of Asking, and their testimonials, not about numbers, but about the courage that they gained. So I'm going to try to show that at the end, but let's conclude, do this blessing. And if you'd like to see that video, we'll try to get that up and let you see that too. It's a 4-minute video. What do we got? Anything coming? I want you to know it's 39 degrees in Massachusetts and it's sunny. Is it open? Are you guys putting stuff in? Still typing?
That was mine.
Wow. Yay, awesome.
We'll make it.
Yeah. Trust is a fascinating thing because sometimes we have to give it before we received it. Sometimes we have to earn it before we get it. Nice. So narrative financial reports, develop gratitude, commitment, explore new spigots, promote legacy living. Some new ones. Bigger words have been named by more than one person. As you declare these actions that you're taking, you're actually changing the world. Just by declaring these, you're naming them as possibilities, next steps. Anybody gonna make a phone call? Talk to somebody? These are great. Look at the new IRA guidelines. Regular stewardship info, that means ongoing. We didn't really talk about year-round stewardship, but do you recognize that year-round stewardship is the same thing as regular and ongoing? Right? As opposed to the once a year because the crops have come in, so we know what we can give away. There are some parts of the world in the United States where that's still the way people live, but for most of us, our paychecks are monthly or
I went to a call meeting for a pastor in the lower part of the state, this was about 20 years ago, and that's what he said. It was and they had fields coming up to the church.
Yeah.
But they got, when the crops come in, that's when they got their contributions.
Yep. Or their eggs, or their chickens. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they said that.
We're not very far away from being an agrarian culture, right? And most of us aren't picking up our eggs from a neighbor, we're picking them up from the grocery store, right? Look at this, accountability, thankfulness. Gifts from God, that's a great one. It's so easy for us to focus on the gifts that we've earned by the sweat of our brow. I mean, to show up as a person who recognizes everything's a gift from God. We've got responses in from 8 people. Anybody else still working? For some reason, my computer's not charging again. We're almost done here. Anybody else? Give me your hands up if you're still working. it's longer words, I don't know why it's all going in a line. So I want to thank you for all of these ways that you are choosing to show up in the world as a leader, as a courageous human being who's willing. Remember this morning we talked about money. We didn't talk about talking about money or the need to talk about money. You actually engaged in talking about money. And this afternoon we looked at some best practices and some next steps. The next steps in your ministry setting are going to be contextual to your ministry setting. Remember I showed you that wheel? Stewardship is a way of life, it's a way of being. It is so much more than one exercise or one task. So I hope you recognize that what we've done today is a slice of the work that is part of the way we show up as stewardship leaders and bless each other. I want to offer the blessing in the book as a blessing for our day. And it is. Now, for those of you who know DISC, you'll discover some DISC dimensions in this blessing. Any final questions before we wrap up today? You got the book. Thank you, the ELCA folks, for making this available to you. It's currently on sale. I saw at Cokesbury for like $12. So, and then it was back ordered. So I don't know what that means, but enjoy. There is not an electronic version of it currently available. So I hope this is helpful to you. It was a gift to me to write it. It's a real gift to me to share it with the world. And I hope it's something that you're able to use again and again. And you know, there may be some stuff in it that's not going to be a best practice anymore in a few years. Things are going to continue to change. So there's a benediction on page 143 with my gratitude to all of you, to the team that planned this event and this day, to the tech folks who've kept us afloat all day, for those of you who have been present in any way that you're able to be, for all or even part of this day. I give thanks to God for each and every one of you. So receive this benediction. I will be available for questions afterwards, and we may try to show the other video if you're interested in the asking concept more. I know that's a topic that many people are asking about. So, you ready? Receive this benediction. To those of us who are terrified of talking about money, a blessing for courage. To those of us curious about money, a blessing for creative exploration of possibilities. To those of us oblivious to the control money has over our lives, wisdom for personal stewardship. To those planning well who worry about planning well enough, confidence in God's provision. To those experiencing a call to teaching financial stewardship, opportunities to learn and be heard. To all stewards, a blessing for knowledge, wisdom, grace, and courage, aligning our financial stewardship with spiritual disciplines, transforming our fears into faith every day. I give thanks to God for you, for this day. Today matters. And I hope you have felt blessed and encouraged and inspired to continue the journey that is your life as a stewardship leader. And the people of God said, Amen. 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 Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you. Since we've had our benediction, I just ask that you take a few minutes while you're watching the video and fill out the feedback form. These are very useful, and the team does use these in preparation for upcoming events. So if you would take a few minutes and do that, there's a box in the entryway that you can drop them into. And also, if you would take your name tags and drop them into a box that is also available in the entryway here. So thank you again all for your time and your commitment, not only to this day in learning, but to stewardship, to faithful living. Have a great day.